trauma doesn't just affect the person who experienced it. It changes the way genes are expressed, and those changes can be inherited. Your grandmother's fear can live in your nervous system. Your great-grandmother's survival response can shape the way your body reacts to a threat today, even if you have never personally experienced that threat. Researchers have actually demonstrated this. Welcome to the Anniston Riekstins Show. This space is created for the woman coming home to her voice, her power, her way. For the woman remembering who she really is, beneath the noise, beneath the roles, beneath the world's expectations. I'm Anniston, transformational guide, spiritual teacher, best-selling author, and creator, here to walk beside you, to share stories, wisdom, and energy that guide you back home. Here, we lead from the inside out. We create from overflow, not hustle. We rise not by becoming someone else, but by remembering who we've always been. This isn't just a podcast. It's a homecoming. So let's dive in. Welcome back to the Anniston Riekstins Show. Do I have an episode for you today? The last few months, I have felt the increasing desire to share my truth in ways that I have never before. For those of you who know or who don't know me, I'm a seeker of truth, a perpetual student of life, and I have majored in myself. But on my journey, I have done tremendous research into why we are the way that we are, think the way that we do, live the way that we live, and ultimately believe the way we believe. I've been mildly obsessed. And what I have found is that a belief unquestioned is dangerous and can be unbelievably destructive. So why is this important to bring up now? Because we're all being invited to step into our most authentic identity. And as an identity architect and transformational mentor for women, what I have come to understand is that it is very hard to change an identity without first changing the beliefs underneath it. Most of us never question our beliefs. We assume that they are fact. We assume they are truth. We assume they are simply the way things are. Well, my goal in this series is to shed light on things you might not know, to give you a different way to perceive your life, yourself, your history, because when perception shifts, identity shifts. And when identity shifts, everything becomes possible. So I want to start by sharing a personal story with you. When I was in 5th grade, I was given my first public speaking assignment. I feel like it was a report on a planet, and I'm pretty sure I got assigned Uranus, which still makes me giggle when I say that. I pored over that poster board and I wrote out my flashcards with all the impressive stats for this very funnily named planet. And honestly, I felt nothing but excitement for giving this presentation. But then when the teacher called my name and I took my position at the front of the class, something within me shifted in my body. I had my first panic attack. Now, I didn't really know what that was or what was happening. All I knew is that in my heart, I felt it was starting to beat out of my chest. Like I couldn't catch my breath. I froze. I couldn't utter a word. The teacher came to check on me and asked if I wanted to sit down and try again later. So I nodded yes. I made my way back to my desk without making any eye contact with the kids that were giggling at me. And I never got up that day to try again. In fact, I made it my mission to avoid public speaking at all costs the rest of my education. That is until I made it to my junior year of college. I had my sights on applying for a job at one of the coolest advertising agencies in the country. And as I sat in an auditorium watching representatives from that agency talk about the agency and what it required, I felt tingles the whole time. Like my whole body was saying, this is your future. But at the end of their presentation, they had a slide with requirements for application. And the first one was, must be a confident and compelling public speaker. My heart sank to my feet and immediately tears sprang to my eyes. I felt so defeated because I believed with every fiber in my being, I couldn't ever be a confident and compelling public speaker. But as I left that auditorium, and I sat outside to collect myself. I heard a tiny, quiet voice that said, "What if you could be?" And so in a single act of courage, I marched to the registrar's office, I changed my minor to speech communication, and I started the very painful process of facing my greatest fear. Fast forward a few years after landing that job at that agency and then moving on to take a professional public speaking role, traveling around the world on cruise ships. I noticed that while I had worked through and dismantled that limiting belief, my body still responded every time I took the stage. First, the heart rate elevated, then the scattered thoughts, and the fear of what if I freeze? What if I can't do this? And it wouldn't just happen on stage. It continued to happen as I took high-level positions, working for companies, whether it be me sitting in a boardroom around a big table or at lunches when someone would ask me a pointed question in front of everyone else. The safety to speak my truth in front of others, to be seen and to be heard, was still not there. Then I had a panic attack during a sales pitch in my mid-30s. I was at a trade show, having a normal meeting, pitching media to a group of men. And it happened. I faked a coughing fit and excused myself to the bathroom. I remember looking myself in the mirror and saying, "Anniston, get a hold of yourself. Stop being so weak. Stop acting like a child." But what I would come to realize was this. I had learned how to dismantle a limiting belief, but what I hadn't done was heal it in my body. So this began an inward journey, a full excavation of why my nervous system responded as if I was in mortal danger when I was poised to speak up, be seen, say something that mattered, and then the process of healing the root cause. And now I stand on stages. I hold space for rooms full of women. I have an upcoming TEDx talk introducing numerology to the world of academics. And here's what I want you to hear. I sometimes still feel the echo of it because the wound runs deep, ladies, but it doesn't control me anymore. And what I've come to understand is that what I was healing wasn't just mine. It was so much older than me. And today I want to tell you the story of where I believe it actually came from. Because here's what I've noticed. And I say this as someone who now sits across from women every single day in this line of work. The fear of being seen is almost universal. The fear of speaking what's true, of owning what you know, of taking up the space that is actually yours. I see it in the most accomplished, capable, genuinely gifted women. And what strikes me every single time is how big the fear is relative to how safe their actual life is. Like, for the majority, nothing catastrophic has happened to them. Nobody is threatening them, holding a knife to their throat, threatening them if they speak. Their life and safety is not fundamentally in danger. One caveat here. I am a Caucasian woman living in the Western world in a democratic nation with constitutional rights. Not all women have this luxury, and I want to acknowledge that. There are still countries, cultures where women are in fear of their lives for speaking their truth. And I want to say and honor that. And if that's you, I want you to know that I see you and I love you. However, the women I have served up to this point have all lived in a free speech country. And yet something in the body, something deep and old and not entirely rational, is absolutely convinced that being fully visible is dangerous. And today I want to talk about why. Because I think understanding where that fear actually came from is one of the most liberating things that you can do for yourself. Let's start with the actual word witch, because this is where it gets interesting. In Old English, it was Wicca for a woman, and yes, men were called witches too. That's a whole thing we'll get into. But the root of that word traces back to a Proto-Germanic word that means one who bends, one who shapes, one who wakes. And even further back, there's an Indo-European root word, weed, that means to know, to witness, to see what others can't. So the original definition of a witch was basically someone who knows things. That's it. That's the whole crime. She knew things, and not just any things. She knew the plants. She knew the cycles. She knew which root to use when labor stalled, and which herb helped a fever break, and when to plant by the moon, and how to read the energy of a name or a birth date to understand what a soul came here to work through. She was the woman in the village that everyone quietly went to when something was wrong, because she had a system of understanding that worked. It was tested over generations. It was passed through lineages of women. It was real. And the word for that woman across cultures, across centuries, was wise woman. In German, Weisfrau, and Norse traditions, the vulva, and Celtic traditions, the bandroi, which means the female druid. These weren't fringe figures. They were central to how communities functioned. Now, here's where the history gets a little bit more pointed. For thousands of years before the trials, women were the primary keepers of what I'd call sacred knowledge systems, the kind of knowledge that lives at the intersection of nature and numbers and the invisible patterns that run underneath everything we can see. Plant medicine, dream interpretation, astrology, calendrical wisdom, and yes, numerology. The idea that numbers carry frequency, that a birth date isn't just a birthday, it's a blueprint. That a name isn't just a label, it's a vibration. This wasn't fringe thinking. Pythagoras, yes, the math guy, founded what was essentially a school of sacred number theory, and women were among the primary teachers. His wife, Theano, is believed to have led that school after he died. Women were teaching numerology in an academic context in ancient Greece. This knowledge wasn't hidden, it wasn't secret, it was the operating system of life. And then something shifted. The European witch trials ran for roughly 300 years. And I know most people know that, but here's what doesn't get said enough. The majority of people executed were women, and they weren't random women. They were herbalists, midwives, elderly women who lived alone and knew too much, women who had land and no husband, women who healed people outside of any official institution, women who, in some form or another, were operating from a knowledge system that didn't require permission. That last part is the part that got them killed. There was a manual published in 1487 called the Malleus Maleficarum, which translates to Hammer of Witches, and it was basically the official playbook for witch hunters across Europe. And if you ever read it, what's striking is how much of the text is about women's knowing, their connection to nature, their trust in their own bodies, access to information that came from somewhere other than the church. It wasn't their power that scared the institution. It was the source of their power. Because she didn't need an intermediary. She didn't need a priest to tell her what was true for herself. She had her own direct line to her creator, to the earth, to the stars, to the numbers, to the names, to the souls of things. And that kind of self-sovereignty, that self-sovereign knowing, is a threat to any system that wants to be the only gate. So they destroyed it. They didn't just execute women, they executed knowing itself. They made it so that an entire lineage of women became synonymous with danger, evil, and death. They made it so that their daughters watched their mothers burn and learned the lesson that was being taught. Be small, be quiet, don't know too much, don't say what you see, don't trust what you feel, and whatever you do, don't let them know what you know. Here's what you need to understand. That lesson didn't die with those women. It got passed down. I work with women all the time, and sometimes men, who carry a fear that is completely disproportionate to their actual life experience. A woman whom by any external measure is safe, supportive environment, no real threat anywhere in her life, and yet the fear of being seen, the fear of saying what she actually knows, of owning her gifts publicly, having a strong opinion, being too much, that fear is visceral. It lives in the body, it's not rational, and it does not respond to logic. You can tell her she's safe 100 times and something in her still won't believe it. And I see it in the soul blueprints all the time. Women who have significant energy in the areas of voice, heart opening, and authentic expression, who are literally encoded to be here doing that very work. And yet the block around actually doing it is enormous. Their throat tightens, their chest contracts every time they're about to speak up. Some part of them goes, I cannot, I will not, it is not safe. And what I want to say to every single one of those women, what I want to say to you right now, if this is landing, is that fear makes complete sense. It is not irrational or weakness. It is not a character flaw or a mindset problem or evidence that you're not ready. It is an appropriate biological response to something that actually happened. That happened over and over and over again for 300 years across an entire continent and beyond. The fear is rational. It just belongs to a different time. And this is where it gets really interesting to me, because we now have science that can explain this very mechanism. There's a field called epigenetics, and the short version is this: trauma doesn't just affect the person who experienced it. It changes the way genes are expressed, and those changes can be inherited. Your grandmother's fear can live in your nervous system. Your great-grandmother's survival response can shape the way your body reacts to a threat today, even if you have never personally experienced that threat. Researchers have actually demonstrated this. There was a study done. They conditioned mice to fear a specific scent, and then found that the offspring of those mice who had never been exposed to the original conditioning still showed a fear response to that same scent. The fear had been passed through the DNA. It had written itself into the next generation's biology. Now multiply that by hundreds of years of women being hunted for knowing things. Multiply that by generation after generation watching what happened when you were too visible, too confident, too sure of your gifts. Multiply that by the nervous system learning at a cellular level that it is not safe to be fully seen. That learning doesn't just live in the stories we tell. It lives in the body. It lives in the way you contract when you're about to share something really deeply true. It lives in the way your throat tightens when you're about to say what you actually think when it's not the popular opinion. It lives in the way you shrink before you even know that you're shrinking. You didn't learn that pattern in your lifetime. You inherited it. And if you're carrying fear that feels bigger than your personal history can explain, this could be a fear of speaking, of being judged, of owning your knowing, maybe a fear of being too much or too visible or to yourself. This might be why. This isn't just you. This is something much, much older moving through you. And then there's something else I want to name, because this is a layer that doesn't get talked about enough. When women were being burned, when they were being executed or in prison or watching their mothers and their daughters and their neighbors die, many of them made vows, soul level, silent vows, like, I will be small, I will be quiet, I will not teach what I know, I will not be seen, I will not speak truth if it costs me my life, I will not let them know what I carry. From a purely psychological standpoint, those are survival adaptations. They are what you do when you are in mortal danger. You make a promise to whatever force is listening, I will give this up if you let me live. But from a soul blueprint perspective, vows made at that level of desperation don't just dissolve when the body dies. They get carried forward as energetic patterns, as inexplicable blocks, inexplicable ceilings on how visible or how known or how fully yourself you allow yourself to be. I have sat with so many women who are brilliant and gifted and have something genuinely important to offer the world. And the thing that stops them is not lack of skill or a lack of knowledge or strategy. It's invisible. It's an invisible wall that goes up the moment they get close to being fully seen. And when we can trace it, when we actually go into the soul level architecture of what's happening, what we almost always find is just some version of, I made a promise a long time ago that I would not do this, that I would stay hidden, that I would not let them see me. And that promise made complete sense then. It was protection. It was survival. But it is not serving you anymore. It is not serving you now. So why am I telling you all of this? Because I think one of the most powerful things you can do, actually, I think it might be the prerequisite for everything else, is to name it, to bring it out of the body and into the light and say, this is what I'm carrying. This is where it came from, and it is not mine to keep anymore. Because the thing about fear that lives in the body, especially fear that was never processed consciously, that was absorbed or inherited, passed through the DNA and the nervous system or through the collective unconscious, it doesn't respond to strategy. It certainly does not respond to mindset work alone. I can speak to that. It does not respond to someone telling you to just be more confident or speak up more or just own your gifts. You've probably already tried that and found that something still stops you, that resistance still comes back. What it responds to is actually seeing and shining a light on the fear. It responds to being named. Having someone look at the pattern and say, this is real. This is where it came from. And you are allowed to lay it down. The witch wound is not just a metaphor for me. It is a living thing I see in almost every woman that I work with, regardless of her background, regardless of her spiritual framework and beliefs, regardless of whether she's ever heard the term before. It shows up as the voice that says, who are you to say that? Or as the compulsive self-editing before you hit send, or as the way that you make yourself smaller in a room where you could be the most knowing person present. It shows up as the inability to charge what you're worth, to claim what you know, or to stand fully in what you see. And this is not just a women's issue. Men carry this wound too. I know for sure Rudi has had to contend with this wound in deep ways. Men who were labeled heretics, men who were persecuted for their spiritual knowing, men who watched what happened to the women in their lives, their mothers, sisters, grandmothers, daughters, and learned the same lesson, that it is not safe to know things outside the approved system. The witch wound does not have a gender. It has a history, and that history has touched everyone. So let's talk about numerology specifically, because this is where the witch wound and the suppression of sacred knowledge systems like astrology kind of become the same story. Most people hear the word numerology and they either roll their eyes or they think fortune cookies or vague internet personality quizzes. And I totally get that, because after centuries of active suppression, it's often perceived as a shadow of what it was. Numerology, as I practice it, is not about prediction. It is a map of the soul's curriculum. Your birth date encodes a life path, a frequency that describes the specific lessons, distortions, specific gifts that your soul came here to work through in this lifetime. And your birth name, the sounds that your parents spoke over you before you knew who you were, those sounds carry a vibrational signature that maps your soul contracts, your karmic debts, your natural talents, your deepest goals, and overarchingly your soul's destiny. This is not New Age. This predates the New Age movement by thousands of years. The Pythagorean school in 500 BC was built on the idea that number is the language of the universe. The Kabbalistic tradition has gematria, thousands of years old, used to understand the deeper meaning of sacred texts. Ancient Egyptian, Babylonian, Chinese, Hebrew traditions all had some form of sacred number system. All understood that the universe is organized by frequency and that numbers are how we read and interpret that frequency. This wasn't fringe, this was central. And then centuries of suppression, the church declared it heresy. Practicing numerology, astrology, herbalism, things that could get a woman executed. So the women who knew, they went quiet. They passed what they could in secret, in fragments and whispers and translated scrolls hidden in caves. What reached us is fractured and incomplete. And what reached us has often been dismissed as superstition by the same cultural system that suppressed it in the first place. And then notice how you feel, not think, but pay attention to how your body responds when I say, I practice numerology publicly, professionally, as the backbone of serious transformational work. Notice if any part of you flinches a little, or if there's a thought that says, but is that really okay to say out loud? Like, what will people think? That flinch, that's the wound. That's 300 years of Be quiet about what you know, still living in the nervous system. Hey, sister, let's take a quick pause because I want to tell you about something I have just released. It is a free numerology quiz called Uncover the Hidden Patterns Shaping Your Life. And all you need is your date of birth. Here's what you're going to walk away with: your life path number, the curriculum you came here to master, and clarity on the hidden pattern that has been quietly running your life without you even knowing it was there. Because once you can see it, you can stop blaming yourself for it. You realize it was never a you problem. It was just a pattern you hadn't seen clearly yet. And once you can see it, you can actually do something about it. One of my clients said it best. She said, Anniston didn't just tell me about my path. She helped me remember it. That is what this quiz does. The link is in the show notes. It is free and it is worth every minute. Now back to the episode. So let's do this a few more times, just as a little experiment. I'm going to call it the flinch test, and I want you to actually do it. Okay? Don't just listen. I want you to feel your body as I say each of these out loud, and I want you to imagine you are saying them out loud about yourself. I am highly intuitive. I receive information I can't always explain. Sometimes I know things before they happen, or I pick up on energy in a room the moment I walk in, or I have a sense about a person that turns out to be exactly right, and I trust it. Did something in you contract a little? Did some part of you think, okay, but I wouldn't say that out loud. I mean, people would think I'm crazy. I keep that very much to myself. Maybe you've spent years quietly being the person everyone comes to for insight, the one who always seems to know, and you've learned to package it as intuition or a gut feeling because calling it what it actually is feels like way too much. It feels dangerous somehow, like it's going to lead to a loss of something. If you said, I'm psychic, or I channel information from God and my spirit guides out loud in public with your real name attached, something truly bad would happen to you. You'd be dismissed or laughed at, or you would lose credibility, or you would lose people. Here's a personal story of exactly how real this is. In 2013, Rudi, my husband, started sharing openly that he has the ability to intuitively receive information from spirit, that he channels. And I, his wife, the woman who was already quietly drawn to all of this work and doing it myself, by the way, who already knew things about energy and numbers and the invisible architecture of life, I went into a complete panic. Not like a mild discomfort, I mean a panic. I was convinced we were going to lose everything. Our jobs, our friends, our family, our reputation, the life we had built together, all of it gone because he was saying this out loud with his real name attached. Like, it felt dangerous to me, viscerally, physically dangerous. And I want you to sit with that for a second because logically, nothing about our actual situation in 2013 warranted that level of fear. Nobody was threatening us. We weren't in danger. And yet my entire nervous system responded as though we were about to be completely destroyed for this, and that this was the most irresponsible thing we've ever done. That was not my rational mind talking. That was something much, much older. And I hear this same thing constantly. I mean, constantly inside Identity Blueprint intensives. I'll be sitting with someone. I can see in their blueprint that they have significant spiritual gifts. The ability, the natural ability to channel, healing ability, direct access to information from non-ordinary sources, empaths. It's right there in the numbers, encoded in who they came here to be. I can see it clear as day. And when I name it, they oftentimes don't argue with me. They go quiet for a second and then they say, yeah, I think I've always known this to be true deep down. I've felt it. Often in gifts showing themselves early in childhood, and then they are repressed because it wasn't accepted by an authority figure or by parents, or it felt too big. And then I ask, do you share it openly now? And they laugh. That specific laugh that's half relief and half terror, and they say, oh, no way. My parents would never understand. I couldn't possibly while I'm working for this company. Or my husband would think I'd lost my mind, or I would completely lose all respect and all of my business. The circumstances are always different, but the answer is always the same. I know what I carry, and I have decided it is not safe to let anyone see it. That is the wound, ladies, because what you're describing, a person who has direct access to information from a non-ordinary source, is exactly who they were burning. Okay, next one. Again, I'm going to say something and I want you to hear it as if you're saying it and pay attention to what your body does. I practice energy work. I do Reiki, or I work with the body's energetic field, or I do hands-on healing. I can feel where someone is holding tension or trauma in their body without them telling me. Notice, does something in you go quiet when you're in certain company and this comes up? Do you have a version of yourself that you present professionally and then a separate version that does the healing work, and you keep those two things very carefully separated? Do you downplay it? It's just a little Reiki. It's just something I do on the side, because fully owning it feels like way too much exposure. Do you find yourself almost apologizing for it before someone can dismiss it first? Downplaying, deflecting, that preemptive shrinking instinct to make yourself smaller before anyone else can make you smaller. That is not a personality trait. That's a survival strategy, and it's an old one. All right, here's one more. I have strong opinions. I see things clearly. I know when something is true and I know when something isn't, and I'm not always wrong. Actually, I'm right more often than feels comfortable to admit. And sometimes I hold back what I see because I don't want to rock the boat or come across as arrogant or make someone feel bad or be too much. How did that feel? The woman who knows and doesn't say it. The woman who sees the whole picture and offers only a fraction of it. The woman who has learned somewhere that being the most knowing person in the room is a liability, not an asset. The woman who has spent years editing herself down to a size that feels safe. That is the wound. Every single time. And I want you to hear this clearly. None of those flinches are about you not being ready or not being credible or needing to do more work before you're allowed to claim what you know. They are simply the body's memory of what happened to women who claimed exactly that. They are inherited and old, and they are not yours to keep carrying. And here's why I take this personally. Beyond my own story with public speaking, which I shared at the top, I spent 15 years in corporate America, polished, professional, very good at performing the version of myself that fit that room. I had that act down. And I kept the part of me that was drawn to this work, to numerology and soul blueprints and energy and channeling, to the idea that there is a pattern underneath a person's life that actually explains everything, as well as my fierce intuition, my downloads I receive, my ability to sense energy shifts in a room or tap into future potentials. I kept that part completely separate because I was taught somewhere along the way that knowing things this way wasn't real knowing. That data was real, that credentials were real, that anything coming through the body or through a number system or through intuition was at best interesting, at worst embarrassing. And for the longest time, I thought that separation was about professionalism. I thought I was just being strategic, just reading the room. But the more I've understood about the witch wound, the more I think it was something much older than that. That same impulse that made the herbalist teach her daughter in secret, that made the numerologist keep her charts hidden away, that made the wise woman learn to dress like everyone else and not make eye contact for too long. Don't let them see what you know. They will use it against you. When I sat with my own numerology for the first time and saw my life path described back to me in a way that explained my entire life, the hiding and separation, the specific flavor of my struggle, I didn't feel like I was reading a horoscope. I felt like someone had handed me a document I'd written before I was born and forgotten about. That's not superstition. That is clear remembrance. And part of what I remembered was that the hiding was never mine to begin with. So here's what I want to leave you with today, sisters. The fear that you carry, the fear of being fully seen or of speaking your truth out loud, of owning what you know or taking up the space that is actually yours, that fear has a history, and it is not a personal failing. It is not evidence that you are broken or behind or too afraid to do the work. It is very old, very understandable, very human response to a very real danger that was visited on people who looked and moved and knew like you do. So naming it matters because you cannot move through something you cannot see. You cannot release a vow you don't know you made. You cannot heal an inheritance that you've never acknowledged. So this is me naming it with you today out loud. The witch wound is real. The suppression of women's knowing, also real. The fear that lives in the body that says it is not safe to be fully yourself, that fear has a very real source, and it is not you, and it never was you. And so the work is not about becoming braver or more confident or less afraid. It's about recognizing that the threat that created the fear is gone. And then slowly, with a lot of compassion for every version of you that learned to hide, letting the body catch up to that truth. You were never the problem. Your knowing was never the problem. And you are allowed in this lifetime, with this body, with this voice, to remember what you know and say it out loud. If this episode stirred something in you, if you recognize the pattern I described in your body, in your life, and the way you've been holding yourself back, and you want to see what your own soul blueprint is encoding around your voice and gifts, and what you're actually here to do, the Identity Blueprint Intensive is where we start. It's where I start with every single one of my clients. It's a 90-minute deep transformational dive into the numerology of your birth name using an ancient system called soul contract numerology. And it has a way of naming things the witch wound has been keeping quiet for a very long time. You'll find the link in the show notes. And I just want to say, I love you dearly. Thank you for tuning in for this very important, very real, very raw, and relevant episode. I see you, I love you, and I'll catch you in next week's episode. Thank you for being here, beautiful soul. If this episode spoke to you, I'd love for you to pass it along to another woman who might need these words today. And if you feel called, it would mean so much if you would take a moment to rate and review this podcast. It's one of the best ways to support this work and help these messages reach more women who are ready to remember who they are. And if you'd like to stay connected or share what's landing for you, come find me over on Instagram. I'd love to meet you there. Until next time, keep trusting your rhythm, keep honoring your voice, and keep becoming the woman you were always meant to be.